I want to ask you something before I begin. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Like the more you give, the less they see you? Because that's where my story starts. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with a quiet moment where I finally realized I had been erased. My name is Eleanor Price. I'm 62 years old. I've been a widow for 11 years, a mother for 40, and a business owner for longer than most people ever guessed. From the outside, my life looked calm, stable, respectable. But respect, I learned, is a fragile thing when people grow used to your sacrifice. The message came on a Tuesday afternoon. Nothing dramatic. Just one line on my phone while I was reviewing inventory numbers at my desk. Mom, it's probably better if you don't come tonight. It'll be awkward. Awkward. I stared at that word longer than I should have. Awkward for who? For the guests enjoying the dinner I paid for? For the family sitting at a table I helped buy? Or awkward because an older black woman didn't fit the image they wanted to present? I typed back slowly. Is everything okay? No reply. The silence after that message was louder than any argument I'd ever had. It carried years of swallowed comments, forced smiles, and moments where I told myself, be patient, they don't mean it like that. But this time, something shifted. I leaned back in my chair and looked around my office. The shelves held framed certificates, awards from industry associations, photos of storefront openings I had funded and managed myself. I started my home care supply company from my kitchen table after my husband died. No investors. No safety net. Just me, a second-hand laptop, and the refusal to let grief decide my future. And yet, somewhere along the way, I had allowed my family to rewrite that story. It hadn't always been like this. When my son Marcus was younger, he was kind, attentive, proud of me. He used to tell his friends, "My mom runs her own company." His voice would lift when he said it. Things changed after he married Vanessa. Vanessa wasn't cruel. That's important to say. She was polite, polished, and always perfectly dressed. But she came from a family that valued appearances over effort, image over substance. Her parents liked to talk about standards, about what looked right. They never said I didn't belong. They didn't have to. It was in the way conversations stopped when I entered the room. In the way my suggestions were ignored until repeated by someone else. In the way my checks were cashed quickly, but my presence was optional. That night, the night I was told not to come, was supposed to be a celebration. Marcus and Vanessa were hosting a dinner for her parents, her siblings, and a few business associates. They were celebrating the purchase of a new townhouse in a gated community across town. A townhouse I had helped pay for. I had covered the down payment when the bank hesitated. I had co-signed when their credit fell short. I told myself I was helping my son build stability. I told myself that love sometimes looks like sacrifice. But love should not look like exclusion. I stood up from my desk and walked to the window. Below me, traffic moved steadily, people going about lives that didn't include explaining themselves to anyone. I wondered when I'd stopped granting myself that freedom. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Marcus. They just think it's better this way. Please don't make this harder. That was it. No explanation. No apology. Just a request for compliance. I felt the familiar urge to smooth things over, to say okay, to be understanding. That reflex had served everyone but me for years. Instead, I set the phone face down. I went home early that day. The house was quiet, too quiet for a place that had once echoed with laughter and late-night conversations. I changed out of my work clothes and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the neatly wrapped gift I had bought for the dinner. A custom serving set, imported, expensive, chosen with care. I realized something then that made my chest tighten. They didn't want me there, but they wanted what I brought. That was the moment I stopped feeling hurt and started feeling clear. I walked into my study and opened the filing cabinet I hadn't touched in months. Inside were documents I knew by heart, but rarely revisited. Loan agreements, property records, company policies, legal protections I had put in place out of responsibility, not suspicion. I wasn't angry yet. I was awake. Before I did anything else, I made myself a cup of tea and sat down. I needed to think, not react. 62 years of living had taught me that emotion fades, but decisions echo. I replayed the past year in my mind. The way Vanessa's mother, Lorraine, referred to the townhouse as their family's new start, never mentioning my involvement. The way Marcus avoided eye contact when finances came up. The way my name was absent from conversations where my money was present. I thought about the dinners I attended where my seat felt temporary. About holidays where I cooked, cleaned, and quietly left early. And I asked myself a hard question. If I were not useful, would I still be welcome? The answer came faster than I expected.
No.
That evening, while they gathered without me, laughing under warm lights in a home made possible by my labor, I sat alone and made my first call. It wasn't to my son. It was to my attorney. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply said, I need to review my financial exposure. Tonight. There was a pause on the other end. Then a calm reply. Of course, Miss Price. I'll pull everything. As the night deepened, my phone lit up repeatedly. Missed calls. Messages growing more frantic. Mom, can you call me? Please don't do anything drastic. Drastic. Another word people use when they fear consequences. I didn't respond. I slept better that night than I had in months. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to earn a seat at a table I helped build. I was preparing to stand up. And I promise you this, what happened next wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries. And boundaries, once crossed too many times, have a way of changing everything. If you've ever felt taken for granted, stay with me. Because this is only the beginning. The morning after that dinner I didn't attend. The world didn't end. The sun still rose. My coffee still tasted the same. The city still moved at its usual pace. And that, more than anything, told me how small I had made myself inside my own life. I woke up early, as I always did, but instead of heading straight to work, I sat at the kitchen table and let the quiet settle. No radio. No television. Just me and the truth I'd been avoiding. At 662, I wasn't fragile. I wasn't confused. I wasn't lonely in the way people like to imagine older women are. What I was tired. Tired of being generous to people who saw generosity as entitlement. My phone buzzed again. Marcus. I didn't answer. I showered, dressed carefully, and looked at myself in the mirror longer than usual. The woman staring back at me had silver threaded through her hair and lines at the corners of her eyes, but there was nothing weak about her posture. I had survived grief, racism in boardrooms, banks that didn't take me seriously until they had no choice. I had survived being underestimated my entire life. I had not survived by begging for permission. At 9 o'clock, my attorney called back. Eleanor, she said gently, I reviewed the documents you sent over last night. You're legally exposed in more ways than you should be. I expected that. Still, hearing it out loud stung. The townhouse loan, she continued, you're not just a co-signer. You're the primary guarantor. If anything goes wrong, it falls on you. I closed my eyes. Can that be changed? Yes, she said. But it will cause conflict. I let out a short laugh. Conflict already exists. I'm just the only one pretending it doesn't. There was a pause. Then, what do you want to do? That was the question, wasn't it? For decades, my wants had been adjusted to fit everyone else's comfort. I wanted peace. I wanted respect. I wanted to stop being treated like a background character in a story I financed. I want to protect myself, I said finally. And I want to stop enabling behavior that hurts me. She didn't hesitate. Then we move. By the time I arrived at my office, I had a list. Not emotional ultimatums. Not dramatic gestures. Just practical steps. I called my financial advisor next. He'd been with me for years. Watched my company grow from 5 employees to over 200. He knew my patterns, my caution, my generosity. When I explained the situation, he sighed. I was wondering when this would come up, he said. That surprised me. You were? Yes, he admitted. You've been subsidizing their lifestyle quietly. It's admirable, but it's not sustainable. Not sustainable. Another truth. We spent the next hour reviewing accounts. supplemental cards, automatic transfers, quiet monthly expenses that benefited Marcus and Vanessa but were rarely discussed. Pause all discretionary support, I said. Effective immediately. There was no drama in my voice. Just resolve. Understood, he replied. I'll confirm in writing. By noon, the first cracks appeared. Marcus finally called. Mom, he said quickly, his voice tight. Did you do something with the accounts? I leaned back in my chair. What makes you ask? The card didn't work, he snapped. Vanessa was trying to pay for something and it declined. I finished calmly. Yes. Why would you do that without telling me? I waited. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I wanted to hear what he'd say next. Mom, he continued, lowering his voice, this makes us look bad. There it was. Not hurt. Not concern. Image. I wasn't invited to dinner, I said evenly. Did that make me look good? That's different, he said immediately. How? Silence. They were uncomfortable, he finally said. It wasn't personal. I nodded to myself, even though he couldn't see it. And cutting off my access to my own dignity wasn't personal either, I suppose. Why are you being like this? He asked, frustration creeping in. You're overreacting. Overreacting. The favorite word used when someone finally reacts at all. I'm reacting appropriately, I said. For the first time. He exhaled sharply. So, what? You're punishing us? No, I replied. I'm stepping back. That townhouse, he began. I'm reviewing my legal involvement, I said, cutting him off. You'll hear from my attorney. What? His voice rose. You can't just do that. I can, I said quietly. And I am. He hung up on me. That hurt more than I expected. Not because of the act itself, but because it confirmed something I'd feared. When I stopped being convenient, I stopped being tolerable. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and emails, but my mind stayed sharp. Every decision I made felt aligned, not rushed. By evening, Vanessa called. Her tone was softer. Careful. Eleanor, she said, using my name the way she did when she wanted something. Marcus is really upset. I imagine he is. We didn't mean to exclude you, she continued. The dynamic was complicated. For whom? I asked. For everyone, she said quickly. I smiled without humor. Funny. I was the only one not there. She hesitated. You know how my parents are. Yes, I said. I do. They didn't grow up like you, she added, as if that explained everything. I stiffened. How did I grow up, Vanessa? Another pause. Then, I didn't mean it like that. That's the problem, I replied. You never do. She sighed. Look, can we just move past this? Marcus needs you. There it was again. Need. Not want. Not appreciate. What happens when he doesn't need me? I asked. She didn't answer. I've spent my life making sure everyone around me was comfortable, I continued, including people who never bothered to ask if I was. You're his mother, she said. That's what mothers do. And I'm a person, I said. That's what you keep forgetting. The call ended politely but coldly. That night, I went home and cooked dinner for myself. Nothing fancy. Just food that tasted like care. As I ate, I realized how long it had been since I'd done that without rushing, without guilt. Over the next few days, the pressure increased. Messages. Calls. Attempts to soften me up. Vanessa's mother even left a voicemail, heavy with false warmth. We're family, she said. These misunderstandings happen. Let's not make things uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. That word again. Always used when someone finally stops absorbing discomfort for others. I didn't respond. Instead, I signed papers. I removed myself as guarantor. I set boundaries in writing. I restructured my estate plans. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. Marcus showed up at my house unannounced that Friday. He stood in my doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp with anger, and something else. Fear. You're really doing this, he said. Yes. All because of one dinner? I looked at him carefully. If you think this started with one dinner, Then you haven't been paying attention.
He scoffed.
You're choosing pride over family. I stepped aside and gestured for him to come in.
He didn't.
No, I said. I'm choosing self-respect. He shook his head. You're going to regret this. I met his gaze. I already regret waiting so long. He left without another word. As the door closed, my hands trembled slightly. I won't lie and say it was easy. Letting go never is, especially when it's your own child. But grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet acceptance. And sometimes it's the beginning of something stronger than love without limits. That night, as I lay in bed, my phone silent for the first time in days, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest.
Peace.
Not the fragile kind that depends on approval, the solid kind that comes from standing on your own ground. And I knew, deep down, that what was coming next would test everyone involved, including me. If you've ever had to choose between being needed and being respected, stay with me. Because the consequences were just beginning. The first letter arrived on a Monday. Not an email, not a text. A physical envelope, thick and official, waiting on my kitchen counter when I got home from work. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. I recognized the return address immediately. Vanessa's father. I let it sit there while I poured myself a glass of water and took a breath. I wasn't afraid, but I was bracing myself. When people lose access to what they're used to, they often mistake firmness for hostility. I opened the envelope slowly. The letter was long, polite on the surface, sharp underneath. It spoke of family unity, of disappointment, of how my recent decisions had created unnecessary stress. There was even a paragraph about respect for elders, written without a trace of irony. What struck me most wasn't the accusation. It was the assumption that I owed them comfort, that my boundaries were negotiable, that my money, my support, my presence were communal property as long as they benefited everyone else. I folded the letter neatly and placed it back in the envelope. Then I threw it away. That same week, word started spreading. Not loudly, not directly, but the way it always does, through sideways comments and concerned phone calls from people who suddenly wanted to check in. Are you okay? One acquaintance asked. I heard there's tension with your son. Tension. Such a gentle word for something that felt like surgery, without anesthesia. Yes, I said simply. I'm okay. And I was. But okay doesn't mean untouched.
At work, I stayed focused.
Numbers don't lie. People do. The company was thriving, and I poured myself into it with renewed clarity. I wasn't distracted anymore by emergencies that weren't really emergencies. I wasn't stepping away from meetings to soothe feelings that weren't my responsibility. For the first time in years, my time felt like it belonged to me. Marcus, however, did not share that sense of peace. He called again on Thursday, his tone different this time. Not angry, calculated. I spoke to the bank, he said. They said you're withdrawing from the loan completely. Yes. You know that puts us in a bad position. I know it puts you in a realistic one, I replied. You're forcing our hand, he said. Vanessa's parents are furious. I almost laughed. They're allowed to be. This could affect our marriage, he added. That one landed harder. I'm sorry to hear that, I said and meant it. But I'm not responsible for holding your marriage together with my money. He went quiet. Then, you always do this. Do what? Control things, he said. With your resources. I closed my eyes. Marcus, control is making decisions for others. I'm making decisions for myself. That's not how it feels, he snapped. I can't manage your feelings, I replied. Only my actions. He hung up again. After that, the messages stopped. Weeks passed. And in that space, something unexpected happened. I began to notice myself again. I noticed how much lighter my shoulders felt without the constant weight of expectation. I noticed how my weekends opened up when I wasn't hosting, rescuing, or smoothing things over. I noticed how laughter came easier when it wasn't measured. I joined a walking group in the mornings. Women my age, different backgrounds, same quiet resilience. We talked about books, health, travel. about children and boundaries and the strange freedom that comes later in life. One morning, after our walk, a woman named Ruth looked at me and said, "You seem different." In a good way? She smiled. In a real way. That stayed with me. Then came the turning point. It was a voicemail from Vanessa. Her voice was strained, controlled too tightly. "Eleanor," she said, "we need to talk. Things have gotten complicated." I didn't call back right away. I waited until that evening, until I was settled, until I knew I wouldn't be pulled into old patterns. When I did call, she answered immediately. "Thank you," she said quickly. "Marcus is not doing well." I listened. "The townhouse deal is falling apart," she continued. "Without your backing, the interest rate skyrocketed. We might lose it." I pictured the place. The sleek countertops. The rooms I'd walked through silently while they discussed design choices without me. "I see," I said. "And the timing is terrible," she added. "My parents are embarrassed. They feel like you put us in this position on purpose." I took a breath. "Vanessa, I need you to hear me." She went quiet. "I didn't take anything away," I said. "I stopped giving what was hurting me." "That's the same thing to us," she replied. "That's the problem," I said gently. "You see my support as yours by default." Her voice cracked. "So, what are you saying?" "I'm saying the relationship we had wasn't balanced," I said. "And I'm no longer willing to pretend it was." She started crying then. Not loud sobs. Quiet, controlled tears. "I never wanted it to be like this," she said. "Neither did I replied. After the call, I sat in silence for a long time. I thought about the versions of myself I had been. The accommodating mother. The invisible financier. The woman who believed love meant enduring discomfort quietly. And I thought about the woman I was becoming. Someone who could say no without apologizing. Someone who could love without surrendering herself. A few days later, Marcus showed up again. This time he knocked. I opened the door and saw the exhaustion in his face. Not just anger now.
Loss.
"Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table where I had once done his homework, where I had balanced budgets and packed lunches and planned futures. "I don't recognize you," he said. I met his gaze. "I do." He rubbed his hands together. "Everything's falling apart. Or everything's changing," I replied. He looked at me, eyes glossy. "I need my mother." That sentence broke something open in me. "I'm still your mother," I said softly. "But I can't be your safety net at the cost of my own stability." "So that's it?" he asked. "You're done?" I shook my head. "I'm not done loving you. I'm done sacrificing myself to be loved." He sat back, stunned. "I raised you to stand on your own," I continued. "Not to stand on me." We sat there a long time. When he left, he hugged me for the first time in months. It was awkward, brief, but real. That night I cried. Not because I was weak, because grief and growth often share the same space, and because I knew the hardest part was still ahead. When people realize you won't bend anymore, they don't always walk away quietly. Sometimes they push back harder. And that storm was coming. The storm didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, disguised as concern, as reason, as love that suddenly wanted to renegotiate its terms. 2 weeks after Marcus came to my kitchen table and left with more questions than answers, I got a call from someone I hadn't heard from in years. My younger sister, Denise. We shared blood, memories, and very different philosophies about family. Denise had always believed that peace meant compromise, no matter the cost. "I heard what's going on," she said after a brief greeting. "I'm sure you did," I replied calmly. "People are talking, Eleanor," she continued. "They're worried." I smiled to myself. Worried had become code for uncomfortable. "About me?" I asked. "About the situation," she corrected. "About you and Marcus." There it was. Never just about me. Denise sighed. "He's your only child. You can't just pull away." "I didn't pull away," I said. "I stopped being pulled apart." She didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice softened. "I know you feel hurt. Anyone would." But family isn't a business contract. I closed my eyes for a moment. You're right. And that's exactly why it shouldn't be one-sided. She tried a different angle. Vanessa's parents feel humiliated. I was humiliated first, I replied. That was different, Denise said gently.
How?
I asked. Silence. You've always been strong, she finally said. Maybe too strong. People lean on you because they know you can handle it. I let out a slow breath. Being able to handle something doesn't mean you should have to. Denise hesitated. So what now? Now, I said, I live my life without being punished for having boundaries. We ended the call politely, but I knew what it meant. The narrative was shifting. I was no longer the generous matriarch. I was becoming the difficult one. That realization didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. It clarified things. A few days later, the real pushback came. Marcus sent me an email. Not a call, not a visit. An email, carefully worded, clearly reviewed by someone else before it reached me. He wrote about stress, about pressure, about how my sudden withdrawal had caused financial instability. He mentioned therapy. He mentioned responsibility. He mentioned forgiveness. What he didn't mention was accountability. At the bottom, there was a sentence that sat heavy in my chest. If you don't help us fix this, I don't know how we move forward as a family. There it was. Compliance disguised as reconciliation. I didn't reply immediately. I forwarded it to my attorney instead. Not because I wanted to escalate things, but because I had learned something important. When emotions are used as leverage, clarity is protection. That same afternoon, Vanessa's mother showed up at my office. Unannounced. The receptionist buzzed me, her voice uncertain. Miss Price, there's a woman here asking to see you. She says it's urgent. I knew who it was before she finished the sentence. Send her up, I said. Lorraine entered my office like she owned the space. Perfect posture. Expensive perfume. A tight smile that never reached her eyes. Eleanor, she said, extending her hand. I stood but didn't take it.
Lorraine.
This is unexpected. She sat without being invited. Families don't need invitations. I took my seat slowly. What can I help you with? She folded her hands. This situation has gone too far. I raised an eyebrow. From your perspective. From any reasonable perspective, she corrected. You embarrassed us. You destabilized your son's marriage. And frankly, you made yourself look vindictive. I studied her face. The confidence. The entitlement. The certainty that she could walk into my workplace and speak to me this way. Let me be very clear, I said calmly. I didn't embarrass you. I stopped funding a lifestyle that excluded me. She scoffed. That's not how families work. That's exactly how exploitation works, I replied. Her smile vanished. You're being dramatic. I leaned forward slightly. You told my son I would make your guests uncomfortable. In a home I helped pay for. Explain to me how that's not dramatic. Her eyes flickered. You could have handled it privately, she snapped. I tried, I said. Repeatedly. She crossed her arms. So, what do you want? An apology? I shook my head. I want distance. She laughed, sharp and humorless. You think you can just attach and everything will be fine? I know I can, I said. Her voice dropped. Marcus will resent you. Marcus is an adult, I replied. So are you. This is not my burden to carry. She stood abruptly. You're destroying your own family. I stood too.
No.
I'm refusing to destroy myself to hold it together. She stared at me, stunned by my lack of fear. This isn't over, she said. It is for me, I replied. After she left, my hands shook. Not from doubt. From adrenaline. I closed my office door and sat down, breathing slowly until the room felt steady again. Strength doesn't mean you don't feel anything. It means you don't let fear make your decisions. That evening, I went home and turned off my phone. For the first time since all of this began, I allowed myself to grieve fully. I grieved the son I thought I had, the family I imagined I was part of, The version of myself that believed love would be reciprocated if I gave enough. The tears came quietly, without drama. They passed through me like a long overdue storm. And when they stopped, something else remained. Resolve. The following week, Marcus stopped calling. Not out of peace, but pride. Vanessa sent one final message.
Short. Cold.
We need space. I almost laughed. Space was the first thing I'd asked for. I gave it to them without argument. Months passed. Life settled into a new rhythm. I traveled. I slept better. I invested in friendships that didn't drain me. I spent time with people who saw me, not my utility. And then, just when things felt calm, the consequences arrived. Not for me.
For them.
I heard through Denise that the townhouse deal had officially collapsed. Penalties. Legal fees. Lost deposits. Vanessa's parents blamed Marcus. Marcus blamed Vanessa. The marriage strained under pressure that my money had once absorbed. I didn't celebrate. I simply observed. One afternoon, I received a handwritten letter. Marcus's handwriting. He wrote about regret, about anger, about how he hadn't realized how much I had been carrying. He didn't ask for money. He asked for forgiveness. I sat with that letter for a long time. Forgiveness is not reconciliation. It's not restoration of access. It's not erasing consequences. It's release. I forgave him quietly, in my own heart. But I didn't respond. Because forgiveness doesn't require reopening doors that were closed for a reason. Not every ending is loud. Some are just firm. And final. If you're still listening, understand this part clearly. Boundaries will cost you people who benefited from your lack of them. But what you gain is yourself. And once you have that, no one can take it from you. Not even family. And still, the story wasn't finished yet. Because when a woman in her 60s chooses herself for the first time, the world doesn't always applaud. Sometimes it watches, waiting. And I was done waiting for permission. The quiet after you set boundaries is strange. It's not peaceful at first. It's hollow, like walking out of a crowded room and suddenly hearing your own footsteps echo. That's where I was when the 5th chapter of my life began. Not in chaos. In stillness. Weeks passed without calls from Marcus. No messages from Vanessa. Even Denise went quiet. At first, that silence felt like punishment. Then, slowly, it felt like relief. I began to understand how much noise I had been living with for years. Expectations disguised as love. Obligation disguised as loyalty. Control disguised as concern. Without it, my days expanded. I started waking up later on weekends. I cooked food I liked instead of food I thought others would approve of. I rearranged my living room just because I wanted the couch near the window. Small things. Quiet things. But they mattered. At work, my confidence sharpened. Clients noticed. Younger women on my team started asking me questions, not just about business, but about life. One afternoon, a woman named Tasha, early 30s, brilliant and constantly apologizing for herself, stayed behind after a meeting. "Miss Price," she said hesitantly, "can I ask you something personal?" I nodded. "How did you learn to stop explaining yourself?" I smiled softly. "By getting tired of being misunderstood on purpose." She laughed, then grew serious. "I'm scared if I say no, people will leave." I looked at her and saw myself 30 years earlier. "Some will," I said honestly. "And that's how you'll know who is only there for what you provided." She nodded slowly, as if storing the truth for later. That conversation stayed with me, because it reminded me that what I was doing wasn't just personal. It was generational. Women like me weren't taught to rest. We were taught to endure. And endurance, I learned, is not the same as fulfillment. Then came the phone call I didn't expect. Marcus. It rang late one evening. I watched the screen for a full 10 seconds before answering.
"Hello," I said.
His voice sounded older. Not physically. Emotionally. "Mom," he said quietly. "I just wanted to tell you, Vanessa and I are separating." I closed my eyes, absorbing the weight of that sentence. "I'm sorry," I said and meant it. There was no satisfaction in hearing it, only sadness for what could have been. We're staying civil, he continued. But things broke. I waited. Let him speak. I blamed you for a long time, he admitted. It was easier than looking at myself. My chest tightened, but I stayed silent. I thought you were punishing us, he said. Now I see you were protecting yourself. That word. Protecting. I didn't know how much I leaned on you, he went on. How much I expected you to absorb everything. I swallowed. I didn't teach you that intentionally. I know, he said. You just always did. We sat in that truth together. I'm not calling to ask for anything, he added quickly. I just didn't want you to hear it from someone else. Thank you for telling me, I said. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. Not grieving the marriage. Grieving the years where honesty came too late. In the months that followed, Marcus struggled. Not financially in the way people expected, but internally. For the first time, he had to define himself without leaning on my stability or Vanessa's parents' expectations.
He started therapy.
He downsized. He learned, slowly, painfully, what independence actually costs. I didn't intervene. Not because I didn't care, but because growth needs space. Meanwhile, my own life continued to open. I took a solo trip for my 63rd birthday. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one knew me as someone's mother or someone's safety net. Just Eleanor. I walked along the ocean at sunrise, shoes in hand, waves cold against my ankles. I laughed out loud for no reason at all. I ate dinner alone without checking my phone. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel selfish. I felt free. When I returned, there was a letter waiting for me. From Marcus. Again. This one was different. No guilt. No fear. Just honesty. He wrote about his childhood. About moments he remembered where I'd given up something quietly so he could have more. Trips I canceled. Opportunities one postponed. Needs I swallowed. I thought that was normal, he wrote. I thought love meant disappearing. My eyes filled with tears. I don't want to live like that anymore, he continued. And I don't want you to either. That was the moment I knew something had truly changed. We met for coffee a week later. Neutral ground. No history clinging to the walls. He looked at me differently. Not as a resource. Not as a shield. As a woman. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, he said. I don't want them to. Neither do I replied. We talked about boundaries. About accountability. About rebuilding something smaller but real. It wasn't dramatic. It was honest. And honesty, I've learned, is far more powerful than obligation. That evening, as I drove home, the sky burned orange and pink at the horizon. I thought about the woman I had been at the beginning of the story, sitting alone with a message that said she wasn't welcome. And I thought about who I was now, a woman who didn't need to be invited to feel worthy. If you're listening to this and wondering whether choosing yourself is worth the fallout, hear me clearly. It is. Not because life becomes perfect, but because it becomes yours. And in the final chapter, I'll tell you what happened after the dust settled, after the guilt faded, after the world adjusted to my boundaries. Because when you stop living for approval, something unexpected happens. You start living with purpose. And that changes everything. The last thing I learned surprised me the most. Not about family, not about money, not even about forgiveness. I learned that when you finally stop shrinking, the world doesn't collapse. It recalibrates. The final chapter of my story didn't arrive with applause or dramatic confrontations. It arrived quietly, the way real endings do. With acceptance. With clarity. With peace that no longer needed validation. A year passed. Not the kind of year filled with milestones, but the kind filled with steadiness. My company expanded into 2 new regional markets. I promoted 3 women who had been overlooked for years. I stopped working late just to prove something. I trusted the systems I had built. And I trusted myself. Marcus and I settled into a new relationship. Not the old dynamic where I fixed and financed and absorbed. Something smaller. Healthier.
We spoke once a week.
Sometimes more. Sometimes less. No guilt attached. He never asked for money again. That alone told me everything. Vanessa moved back closer to her parents. The separation became official. There was no drama. No courtroom battles. Just two people realizing they had built their marriage on borrowed stability. I didn't involve myself. That was another lesson. You don't need to insert yourself into outcomes you didn't create. Denise came around slowly. One afternoon, she invited me to lunch. You seem lighter, she admitted over soup. I didn't think this would end that way. Neither did I said honestly. She stirred her spoon. I think I was afraid. Afraid that if you could walk away, maybe I could too. And I didn't know if I was ready for that. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Everyone wakes up in their own time. Some relationships stayed distant. Others softened. A few disappeared entirely.
And that was okay.
Because what replaced them was something better. Presence. I started mentoring young women formally. Not just in business, but in boundaries. I spoke at small events, community spaces, places where women my age sat quietly thinking their best years were behind them. I told them the truth. That reinvention doesn't belong to youth. It belongs to courage. I told them it's never too late to stop being convenient. One evening, after a talk, a woman approached me. Late 60s. Hands shaking slightly. I thought it was too late for me, she said. I thought I had waited too long. I smiled gently. You're still breathing. That means it's not too late.
She cried.
I held her. And I understood then that my story was never just about me. It was about permission. The permission women rarely give themselves. On my 64th birthday, I did something symbolic. I changed my will. Not out of anger. Out of intention. I structured it around values, not obligation. I made sure my legacy reflected who I was now, not who people expected me to be. That night, I sat on my porch alone, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the quiet hum of the city. No resentment. No bitterness. Just gratitude. Gratitude that I had listened to the moment when something inside me said, enough. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. You are not selfish for protecting yourself. You are not cruel for setting limits. You are not wrong for changing. And love that requires your disappearance is not love. It's convenience. I lost access to some people, but I gained access to myself. And that was worth everything. If you stayed with me until the very end, thank you for listening. Truly. And if this story felt familiar, if it touched something quiet inside you, I hope you remember one thing tonight. You don't need permission to choose yourself. You never did.